At dawn, the stagecoach rattled into the quiet frontier town, wheels grinding against the frozen earth, dust lifting like pale smoke. The sun stretched long shadows over the wooden porches, and every sound, the crack of the driver's whip, the snort of horses, the crunch of boots, seemed louder in the hush of morning. When the door opened, a woman stepped down. She was young but already worn by travel, her faded calico dress dulled by dust, one suitcase clutched tightly in her gloved hands. Clara Whitfield's eyes searched the crowd with a kind of fragile hope, a flicker in her gaze that dimmed when no man came forward. The onlookers knew before she did. Jedediah Carter, the rancher who had sent for her, was gone. Martha Kincaid, standing with her basket, whispered loud enough for the street to hear, "Well, she's been left on the stoop like an unwanted pup." Chuckles rippled among the townsfolk. Clara's shoulders stiffened, though her lips trembled. The sheriff leaned against the post office rail, spitting tobacco. "Carter lit out for Texas near a month ago," he said flatly. "Reckon he left no note for you." Judge Harlan, tall and gaunt, gave her the kind of look a man saves for stray dogs and burdens. "Best take the next stage out, miss. Ain't safe for a woman alone out here." The words hit like blows. Clara swallowed, her pride holding her spine straight, though she could feel the weight of eyes upon her, judging, cutting. Behind her ribcage, panic scratched like a caged bird, but she would not let them see her break. She pressed her hand against her suitcase, as though gripping it tighter would keep her dignity from spilling onto the dirt. From the edge of the crowd, another set of eyes watched. Elias Boone stood there, hat brim low, his broad frame leaning against the livery post. A cowboy known for his silence, he had spent years letting the world pass without asking much of it. He had no family, no wife, just a cabin tucked into the trees and the memory of too many winters alone. Something in the woman's stillness caught him, the way she bore her shame without begging for mercy. When the last of the whispers died down, Elias stepped forward. His boots pressed steady into the earth. "Boarding house won't keep you warm," he said, his voice low, roughened by years of smoke and silence. "My cabin's got a fire." The crowd fell into a hush. Clara looked at him, suspicion and pride flickering in her tired eyes. For a moment, she seemed ready to refuse. But the cold cut sharper than her pride, and there was nowhere else to go. With a slow nod, she gathered her skirts and followed him, leaving behind the whispers that would cling to her name long after. The cabin sat on a rise beyond the edge of town, logs weathered gray, smoke curling thin from the chimney. Inside, it was spare, one chair that wasn't broken, a bed pressed against the far wall, shelves lined with tools instead of books. The scent of pine smoke lingered, mixed with leather and dust. Clara set her suitcase by the door and stood as though she'd walked into a stranger's church. "You take the bed," Elias said, setting kindling into the hearth. "I'll lay by the fire." She shook her head quickly. "I'll not take your place." "It ain't a matter for arguing," he replied, eyes fixed on the flame that caught and spread, casting warmth into the shadows. For days, silence hung between them like unspoken vows. Clara stitched a tear in his work shirt without being asked. Elias chopped twice the firewood he normally would and stacked it neatly beside the hearth. Their exchanges were brief, awkward, and yet each gesture carried a weight that words could not. Slowly, a rhythm formed, two solitary lives circling around the same fire, learning each other without ever naming the learning. But towns are small, and tongues are sharp. Martha Kincaid wasted no time. Living with him under one roof. No vows, no preacher. Mark my words, disgrace follows her like smoke. The word spread, carried in murmurs at the mercantile and over church pews. Faces turned colder when Clara walked into town for flour, whispers trailing behind her like shadows. She felt the sting of it most at night, lying awake in the cabin's bed, staring at the beams overhead. Shame pressed on her chest, heavier than the quilt. Had she tethered this quiet cowboy to her disgrace? Elias never said a word of the gossip. He moved through town with the same steady silence he always had, but Clara noticed the flicker in his eyes when he heard laughter behind their backs. He shouldered it the way he shouldered every burden, yet she knew he heard it all. And still, he made space for her, fresh wood by the fire, a rabbit caught and cleaned, the quiet company of his presence at the table. One night, as snow fell outside and the world beyond their walls seemed buried in white silence, Clara sat by the lamp, sewing. The rhythm of her needle through cloth was the only sound besides the crackle of the fire. Elias watched her hands, the grace of her movements in the flickering light. His thoughts turned heavy, though he spoke none aloud. Asterisk, this house has been empty near 10 years. Tonight, it feels less so. Asterisk. She did not look up, and he did not move closer. But something had shifted. Without a word, the silence between them no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like the beginning of something neither dared to name. Winter thickened around the cabin, snow pressing against the eaves and sealing the world in quiet white. The days slowed into a rhythm of necessity. Firewood, stew, mending, and silence shared like bread. Elias showed Clara how to split kindling without shattering the grain, his hands closing over hers on the worn handle of the axe. She taught him to scatter dried herbs into the pot until the stew no longer tasted of ash but of warmth. It was not romance that bound them at first, but survival, stitched together by small kindnesses and the comfort of not being alone. When Elias came in from chores, his coat dusted with frost, he found his shirt neatly patched. When Clara laid her dress by the fire to dry, she returned to find it hung carefully on a peg, warmed but untouched. Neither spoke of these gestures, but both felt them. The silence between them no longer weighed, it steadied. Yet the town's voice carried even across the snow. At church, Clara overheard the whispers, sharp as needles. Living with him, no vows, sin plain and simple. She stood stiff in the pew, pride the only thing keeping her from crumbling. By the time the sermon ended, she had decided. Come spring, she would leave. Better loneliness than to ruin the man who had given her shelter. That night, Elias found her quiet by the fire, hands clenched in her lap. He spoke slowly, like a man, and used the words. Folks been talking about me since I buried my brother. I got thick skin. Don't you go thinking you gotta leave on account of them. Clara lifted her eyes, startled. He went on, voice low. This place was a tomb before you. Every night, it felt like drowning in silence. You come here, and it's like breath after near drowning. Don't reckon I care what they say. Her throat tightened. She could not answer, not with words, but she reached across the table and set her hand over his. It lingered, warm, before she pulled back. The quiet between them held more weight than 1,000 declarations. The thaw brought confrontation. At the mercantile, Judge Harlan cornered Elias, Martha Kincaid hovering at his shoulder like a crow. This ain't proper, the judge intoned. Send her packing or stand before the preacher. You can't keep her under your roof otherwise. Clara's cheeks burned as every shopper turned to watch. I will not be forced into vows of pity, she said sharply, pride ringing louder than her fear. Elias's jaw tightened. He stood beside her, steady as stone. She ain't charity. She's my choice. The words stunned her. They carried her through the rest of the day, but at night, when the cabin lay hushed and the snow glittered beneath the moon, doubt returned. She packed her suitcase with trembling hands, unable to bear the thought that his kindness was duty disguised as love. She walked to the river, the cold biting through her dress, suitcase dragging at her arm. Elias found her there, breath clouding in the night air, his boots crunching over ice. You leavin'? His voice was rough, but beneath it lay something raw. Clara clutched the handle tighter. I won't chain you to a woman the town calls shame. He stepped closer, snow creaking under his weight. You think it's pity that keeps me here? I've lived a long spell with nothing but my own shadow. You filled the silence in me I thought would never end. Ain't pity. It's life. Her heart caught. The suitcase slipped from her hand, falling into the snow with a soft thud. For the first time since she stepped off that stagecoach, Clara let the tears come. Elias reached out, not with urgency, but with a steady hand, and she let herself be led back to the cabin, the fire waiting for them both. Spring unfurled slowly, wildflowers breaking through the thawed earth around the cabin door. Clara and Elias planted a garden together, kneeling side by side in the soil. Their hands brushed often, not by accident, and each touch carried the quiet promise of belonging. When they walked into town now, whispers still followed, but Clara's head was high, her arm brushing his, unashamed. Elias no longer kept his eyes lowered. He looked straight ahead, as if daring the world to question what had been hard won. The prairie stretched wide and golden, the horizon endless. Where once there had been silence, now there was the soft sound of two lives woven together in work, in firelight, in unspoken vows. And so it was that a woman abandoned on a dusty street, and a cowboy who thought himself condemned to loneliness, found not what they had been promised, but what they needed most. Sometimes life does not give us the story we were expecting. Sometimes it gives us the one that saves us. Out on that lonesome prairie, two souls cast aside by the world found in each other the warmth of a home, and that was truer than any vow a preacher could bless.